Welcome to the show with me, Dan, and my guest, Sophie. How you doing?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, pretty good, thank you. So I'll just do a little introduction of why I wanted you on the show. I'm a little bit nervous for this one, actually, more than I have been for some other ones, is because Sophie is a journalist. So it's a profession I'm very interested in, and I guess sort of what I'm doing on here is a bit of journalism. So yeah, that's pretty much the main reason. I'm very interested in sort of finding out more about people's lives. I'm very interested in politics and just different areas of life, really. And I thought actually talking to someone like you, who's been a journalist for a while and has an insight into the field and maybe has their own views would be really interesting.
What?
Sorry,
You've bigged me up massively now. I've got to try and be really, really impressive.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make you feel as nervous as I feel. That's the only goal.
Well, you've succeeded. Well done.
Yes. Okay, level playing field is good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah. Actually, out of interest, have you? Because I guess you're usually on the other end of this in terms of you're usually doing the interviewing and finding out stories and things like that. Have you done many on the other side where you've had to answer many questions and stuff?
I mean, I talk weekly on radio anyway, so I've kind of a lot of people kind of say, oh, I don't know how you do that. Like, how do you just talk with all of these people listening? And I actually just say I genuinely forget that people are even listening to it. Sometimes that's actually a bad thing because I'll say some ridiculous things and then be like, oh my God, people can hear this. But no, I think, yeah, I think I probably prefer being the interviewer because you sort of feel like you have a little bit more maybe control over it. But
Yeah.
I'm also equally happy to have my brain poked.
Cool. So when you're sort of the stuff you're doing at the moment on the radio, is that mainly by yourself? Do you sort of have to make your own conversation, or are you usually across from other people?
No, so I produce mainly, and kind of I join our main presenter and kind of have a little bit of a chat with him. But my job is more about kind of creating the show and coming up with, guests and ideas and what we're going to talk about and that kind of thing. So that's kind of my job is quite varied. I work as a radio producer, but I also work as a journalist. So it's all very interlinked, but it is also very different at the same time.
Do you think you'd find it difficult to be just by yourself on air for like a while, or like do you prefer having someone else there to bounce off?
No, I mean, I used to I've kind of been in radio since I was quite young. So I started off doing hospital radio, and I did that alongside someone else, and we were kind of co-presenters. And then I kind of then moved into local radio where I had my own show, and I was very happy to have my own show. But I think I've always enjoyed having somebody else with me because I just think it just makes it flow better. It's a nice conversation. And I think I'm confident doing either, but I think generally I prefer to have somebody else to kind of be there to either take the mick out of me or I take the mick out of them.
Yeah. It's a different skill, I think, isn't it? Like doing something like doing a radio show by yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I remember a friend of mine, he did hospital radio as well, and I listened to a couple of his episodes where he was just by himself. He was by himself most of the time, and he would break it up with playing music and stuff. But yeah, I found it fascinating that he could do that, and I did go on once to join him, but I sort of got the feeling that he could just riff by himself, and I wasn't needed as much, as opposed to this sort of thing where it's very much a back and forth type thing.
Well, I think the thing that is so great about hospital radio and local radio in general is just I mean we'll probably get more into this later on as we talk, but I just think there's something very, very special about local journalism and local radio and work. I think it's a lot more authentic, a lot more raw. Obviously, you've got a lot to kind of learn. When I was in hospital radio, I didn't know what on earth I was doing, but it kind of set that groundwork. But I think there's something really special about all of that, and it just makes me really sad that a lot of local stations are kind of going under, and local news is not quite what it was 30 years ago. It's a shame.
Yeah, that is a shame, actually. Yeah, it'd be interesting to get into that maybe a bit later.
Mm.
So okay, let's start off with sort of your first sort of glimpses or ideas of journalism. What sort of first led you into this sort of profession and started you down this path?
My entrance into journalism was quite weird, actually. I worked in so I've kind of done the whole not going to uni and just kind of working from the ground up type thing. That worked for me better. For me, education just wasn't really something that I think I found I found it too regimented.
Mm.
So I ended up working for a couple of small film companies, just being mainly admin and helping when they went on shoots and that kind of thing. And I ended up getting a job working with a job called, oh my goodness, I can't even remember. That's awful, isn't it? I can't. CSC, I think it was CSC Media Group. Could be completely wrong. But they don't exist now, so it doesn't matter. But they were then bought by Sony, and I was just kind of their office manager. I think I was probably about, gosh, 21, maybe a little bit earlier than that, kind of maybe 19. And yeah, just kind of I wasn't in journalism at that point, but then when Sony bought the company, a lot of people's jobs just didn't exist, or people were kind of asked to leave and everything else. It just turned out that me being one of the kind of very junior people in the office was kind of said, thanks but no thanks.
Right.
And for me, it was the end of the world, because I kind of thought that I would climb up through the company, and I'd end up becoming one of the channel managers or whatever it was. But in fact, it actually was a complete blessing in disguise, because I sort of signed up to a temp agency, and the lady called me one day and she said, "Oh, I've got some temp work for you. It's at a really big broadsheet newspaper." And I kind of went, "Yeah, okay, that sounds great, brilliant, yeah, sure, just go for that." And I ended up, I stepped into this huge newsroom. I've never seen a newsroom before, and just absolutely fell in love with the urgency of the place, with the passion. It's so busy, and it's weird because a lot of people think newsrooms are really, really loud places. They're actually not. You'll get the odd person kind of yell across the newsroom every now and again, but it was just, everyone was so absorbed in what they were doing, and everything really mattered. And yeah, and I just kind of, I was only meant to be there for a couple of weeks, and I ended up somehow forcing them to keep me for a bit longer. And then I managed to get a maternity. Again, it was all off, admin based, because I had no qualifications to be a journalist at that point. I just kind of was trying to worm my way in. And yeah, that's kind of how it all started, in a way.
Right. So it's sort of, so the admin you did for the film company, you just did that because it seemed like a sort of a fun job. Well, it wasn't something that you had your eyes on for a while or anything like that.
I think I knew that I wanted to work in media in some capacity.
Right.
I'm naturally quite a creative person. I enjoy conversation. I'm very interested in things. So I just kind of thought, let's be honest, when you're 18, 16, you don't know what you want to do. A lot of people, even at the age of 30, 35, still don't actually know what they want to do.
Yeah.
So I kind of just thought, I know I like that, so let's just give it a go and see what happens. And for me, being underqualified, it was that the admin stuff was the only thing I could really do, without needing a course or whatever. So I kind of just thought, I'll do that, and I'll kind of learn on the job. Personally, I'm a big believer of learning on the job. I think apprentices are brilliant. I think work experience is just fantastic, especially in media.
So what year did you go into this this news outlet? Or was it mainly sort of new, like I don't know how to put it, print and digital, or was it like a TV station or?
So it was a newspaper. So it was an online and print newspaper.
Okay.
It was more, I would say, actually, it was more focused. It was more newspaper focused.
Oh, okay.
And it was probably, I mean, it's a household national newspaper. You'll definitely know which one it is, but I'm not
Yeah.
gonna divulge.
Yeah.
But that would probably have been in 2000 and oh gosh, we're in 2020 now. Maybe 2016,
Oh, okay.
potentially around
Yeah.
that kind of bracket. Sorry, 2015 is probably more accurate.
And what when you went in, what was the sort of feeling around sort of like print and online? Was it, I guess by then it was, or was it more trying to move much more towards online, or
Oh, it was very separate. It was very
was it?
much, yeah. And I think, to be completely honest with you, even though online journalism gets more, it reaches more people, there is still a prestige around the paper. There always has been, even at the tabloid that I work at now, there is just this, it's almost just, paper staff just seem to be in higher regard than online.
Oh, okay.
And when I was working at the Broadsheet, it was very much, people were working really, really hard to get things in the paper, and then, oh yeah, okay, well, if they make it online, then that'd be great, but let's try and get this as a big, one of the big stories on the the front of the Sunday issue or
Right.
whatever.
And that's still sort of the case, is it then?
I think so, yeah. I mean, that's mainly my opinion, but I think that a lot of my colleagues, I've got a lot of friends who work for very different news organizations, strictly speaking newspapers, and it's kind of, it is very much being a paper journalist is more impressive. I think.
Okay.
And I think maybe just because it's old school, and maybe online is just a bit more throwaway. I don't know. But then, funnily enough, that's quite ironic because newspapers are physically throwaway, whereas online is forever.
Lasts
So
forever, yeah.
yeah,
That is interesting. I think I do get that. I mean, from my point of view, I guess with filmmaking, for example, I've never shot on film, like actual proper film. It's always been
really.
digital. And I imagine if I ever did come across someone on a set who we were properly, like even just doing a commercial or whatever, shooting on real film, then I guess that old school approach, I guess maybe that it's starting from a firmer base, maybe with the paper. It's like got that historical sort of base.
I think so. I think as well. It's just journalism as an industry is just. I've said it so many times. It is just like no other industry. It's just newsroom. They're just crazy, crazy places. And I think with newspapers, that's, online is so new. Online news has only been going, I mean, what, like 10, 15 years, maybe a little bit. But like, right now it's getting, so much better and bigger, but it's so new compared to newspapers, and I just think people like actually seeing their name in print, and people like reading actual print stories. I don't know. I think it's like an elitist thing almost, I think. But yeah, I mean, when I was at the Broadsheet, I ended up being captivated by the kind of the buzz of the newsroom, and just chatting to other colleagues and really sort of hearing what they did as a job. I just thought, this is amazing. I really, really want to do what they're doing.
So what was it about that? What, like, I know it might be very specific, but specifically what excited you? Like, if you had a vision in your head, like, oh, I'll be a journalist, like what was it about that job? Because obviously there's so many different types of journalism, and even within those different types there's parts of it, I guess, that people like doing well, whether it's more like the creative writing or just meeting people. So what were sort of the things that really excited you about journalism?
I think for me, being a more creative person, I was always very drawn to feature writing, and I would kind of, I'd be chatting to my friends who were, so they were on the features desk. We were all being the admin girl, I kind of managed to get to know everybody quite well.
So what is feature writing?
So just kind of, I always describe it as just flowery writing. So it's often a difference. If you've got a news piece, it's very strict factual based. There's no adjectives in there. Or, well, I mean, in some places they like to use a lot of adjectives, but often it's meant to be quite to the point news copy. A feature is a lot more. It tends to be a longer read. It's often about somebody or something, or it's not in the news agenda specifically. But often what you'll find with features is they've got some kind of hook in what's going on in the news, if that makes sense.
So is it like opinion pieces? Are they like feature?
Yeah. So an opinion piece would fall into that bracket, or I mean, I've written a feature, for example, about a woman who had a horrendous ordeal battling a drug addiction, and it was just her story. It's very much, features are very much telling somebody the story, and it's you'll find a lot more features in, for example, the Sunday Times. There'll be a lot of really heavy feature stuff, and it's often a lot more. It's got a lot more flavour. Whereas, like I said, news, it's about keeping it concise. It's about dealing with the facts, not kind of using overly expressive words, that kind of thing.
So I guess it's the more the entertainment part of reading comes into features.
Yeah, definitely.
As opposed to just a reader who wants to just know what's gone on, when it happened, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think I sort of, I would chat to my friends, and they would be telling me about how they're going to this women's refuge, and they're going to go and speak to the women that live there and what it's like. And it's, or travel pieces would often fall into the feature bracket and stuff. So there's a lot more room with features. There's a lot more stretch in what you can and can't do. And I think I really liked that. And I like the fact that you're kind of creating almost pieces of art. As cheesy as that sounds, you're picking a subject and you're really making it into something beautiful or really hard hitting or something really shocking. So yeah, that captivated me.
Had you done much creative writing before? Had you had that been...
So it's funny. I mean, I'd always kept a journal. But I was never the kid that kind of entered into creative writing competitions or any of that sort of thing. But I kind of just decided there and then, this is something that I think I can do. I was good at writing at school. So I just kind of, I don't know, I just thought, right, okay, I might just take a course in journalism while I'm here. And I knew that I had a year or so there anyway. So I went and studied what is called an NCTJ, which I would advise any budding journalist to do, because a lot of jobs will actually not take you on if you haven't got this specific qualification. And I studied that whilst I was working at the Broadsheet, and then I was lucky enough, because I knew people there and I was friends with a lot of the different desks and a lot of the different teams. I kind of just said, I'd really like to write about this, what do you think? And luckily enough they said, yeah, all right. Nice. And they let me. So that's kind of where it started.
Was it one quick question, what is the difference between a broadsheet and a tabloid in your eyes?
Oh my goodness! So this is all stuff that I learned. This is stuff that I should really know. So I mean, I could tell you which ones are broadsheets and which ones are tabloids. I don't actually know the exact definition between the two of them.
Just your sort of definition.
Tabloid. So for me, a tabloid is so a classic tabloid is the Sun, right? So it's it's often to do with the size. So a tabloid is much smaller. A broadsheet like the Telegraph or the Times and the Financial Times is very long. So it's I could be wrong saying this, and I hope that I'm not, but I feel like it is the size that is the first thing that separates the two of them.
Right. Well, it makes sense. I guess a broadsheet implies a big newspaper.
Yes, exactly. Whereas tabloids they tend to be more fun. They go for the kind of slightly more sensational, crazy stories, whereas broadsheets tend to be a little bit more reserved and they hold back a little bit more. And I think people do fall into a bracket. You can really tell the difference between a broadsheet journalist and a tabloid journalist. Speaking very stereotypically here, someone who would work for, say, the Times newspaper is often quite studious. They're often very, sort of very interested in culture and everything else. And then you've got a Sun journalist, for example, who, is a little bit more, enjoys the drama, enjoys the fun. And it's just a different, you're speaking to a different audience.
So what do you think for you personally appeals to you more, or rings better with you?
So I've worked in both. I've worked in I've actually worked in more tabloids than I have broadsheets now. But I think if you'd have asked me that question 2 years ago, I probably would have said to you that I preferred working in tabloids because they're fun, and they are, and I can't, you can't deny that. However, I think as somebody who I very much enjoy writing about things that will make a difference or educate people. Like the features that I was telling you about, I'm very much interested in people's lives and in people in particular. And I personally feel that if, say, for example, I was on the features team for the Telegraph, I feel like I would maybe feel like my job was more, for me, this is purely my own opinion, I would feel a little bit more satisfied, I think, rather than working on a very quick, entertainment-based, shock-based tabloid.
Yeah, so
they're very different things.
So it almost sounds like maybe the tabloids is more the surface sort of joy, but maybe the working for the broadsheets is more rewarding long term and more sort of like touches your heart type stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Did you were you reading much news before? Did you have sort of opinions or favourite newspapers or favourite news programs to watch, or was it something that once you got the admin role that then you started to learn more about and start to have preferences?
It's probably a mixture of the two. I think I always loved documentaries growing up, so I'd always loved watching Louis Theroux. I'm a big fan of Stacey Dooley. I think she's really, really great, and she is really, I think a lot of documentaries are, I think it's really important that teenagers and young people get into documentaries,
right?
And I think often teenagers can possibly kind of, I'm kind of talking 12, 13, like young teenagers. They might think, put Netflix on. What am I going to watch? Am I going to sit down and watch a documentary about the south of France, or am I going to watch, Rick and Morty, for example?
Yeah,
and I just, I think people like Stacey Dooley, she's great at really kind of getting that young audience in. So yeah, I always watched documentaries and things. I would probably say that I liked reading a lot of the culture section, so I was quite fond of reading like the Sunday Times and the Guardian. I always loved reading the Guardian about their sort of the music and arts and stuff. But I grew up in a household where BBC News was always on in the background, so I kept up to speed with what was going on in the news. But I think I wouldn't say that I was a super well-read child.
Yeah. Did you when you started at the broadsheet, or just I guess in general, a couple of questions. What are the environments different in terms of nurturing and competitive? Like, did you find, I mean, you said, when you were suggesting stories and stuff, people were very nice about it and they said, go for it. Did you find there was much of that sort of like dirty sort of competitive and quite seedy sort of environment at any point? Or do you think on the whole, actually people were pretty nurturing as you were sort of climbing up and getting more experience?
No, I think I have a lot of respect and I have a lot of love for that broadsheet that I worked for. I'm looking at it now as somebody who edits younger, or I edit young journalists' work and stuff now. So I kind of almost want to thank the people who, when I was only kind of 20, coming up with these stories, they were so patient and they were so. No one kind of was like, well, that's a ridiculous idea or anything like that. I mean,
right.
Maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit. Maybe my ideas were really good, but it was definitely very nurturing. And there were a lot of people, a lot of women, particularly, female journalists in particular, who I would email and kind of say, hey, I'd really love to grab a coffee with you and kind of, get some advice from you on how to be a journalist and everything else, and they'd always give me the time. So it was the thing is with journalism is everybody is out to succeed. Every journalist that I've met is constantly working on something else, or they want to better themselves. So there is that very, very high level of competition, but there is also there's a lot of help within it. You know, I think if you're a young journalist, or if maybe you're working at a local and you want to kind of move into nationals, it really is just a case of, you know, if you manage to kind of make a couple of connections with people who work at nationals, just give them a message, because often those national journalists know exactly how hard it is to be a local journalist, and will often give a bit of advice or a bit of help. So it's not the cutthroat industry that people think it is sometimes.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think maybe more so with creative industries. I don't know. I mean, I know that maybe in the chefing world it's a bit of it, but I've also been lucky as well, to be honest, with filming. Like I've been very lucky on sets that I've been on the bottom rung of the ladder, and just as a freelancer, I've been very lucky. But some sets I've been on, there's just been a bit of that sort of like stepping on other people just being a bit dickish to each other type thing, and I'm sure that can be common, or can be very easy for people to slip into in creative industries, because you really have to make a name for yourself, and because it's not as by numbers in the same way that, like, I don't know, career in banking might be. You know, you do this for a few years, then you'll do this, and then, you know, with creative industry, you know, if you're a musician, or, you know, you're a filmmaker, or, you know, even just a painter or an artist, maybe less so with them because it's more solo, but when you're in an environment, I guess it's easy for, once someone successful starts stepping on other people, then it can descend, I guess, into then the lower people think, oh, well, I've got to step on people to get up. So that's nice to hear that you've had a much more nurturing environment than might have been, I guess, in other times, or in other newspapers.
I mean, the one thing I would say is that journalism, newspaper, tabloid journalism especially, is not for the faint-hearted. You know, whilst it is nurturing, and it's actually approaching journalists, other journalists or reporters, and kind of saying, well, what do you think about this? Or, you know, going for people's advice is one thing. But I would also say that, you know, even at the Broadsheet newspaper, I'm sure the layout is very different now, but we used to call it the Circle of Doom, and it was literally a circular row of desks where you'd have all of the editors and the kind of the big dogs all sat there, and you would not dare walk through that circle. Right. You know, like, you just, so there is, it's not for the faint-hearted. You know, there is definitely, you have to be very, very thick-skinned. I mean, I managed to I ended up writing a nature column for this broadsheet for a while, and again, super new to it. You know, I was very lucky. I think, you know, a lot of journalists will you know, they have to start in local news and they have to build their way up. But I was very lucky that I kind of managed to kind of squeeze in, you know, that way. But I was writing a nature column for a while, and one of the editors, I can't remember his exact words, but it was something along the lines of, I've read your copy and it's really boring. And for somebody who was very new to this, I kind of felt a little bit like, I mean, I had massive imposter syndrome. I was just trying to learn as much as I could, but there was definitely an element of me thinking someone at some point is going to tap on my shoulder and go, Sophie, why are you here? Like, you know, what are you doing here? So he sent me that email saying this is really boring, and I went into the store cupboard and cried. But, you know, that now, if I've had way worse than that, but you just learn to get a thick skin. But you absolutely have to, especially if you work at some news organisations.
Yeah, and I guess in any industry you're going to meet people who are not very nice, and instead of giving you constructive criticism, they just tell you something is boring. Have you ever faced any sexism in the workplace? Again, you don't even have to say if it's a broadsheet or tabloid, but just have you faced any of that along the way?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I think. Oh wow, is that thunder?
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
That is really loud. Wow.
It's now just echoed where I am as well. So
Wow.
sorry, right.
No, that's all right. Ominous, isn't
Sexism.
it? Yeah, exactly. That was perfect, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I have done, yeah. Nothing that I would necessarily nothing that I'd necessarily kind of go and complain about or anything like that. But I do think um journalism and newspaper journalism in particular is it's changing now, but it was very much a male led and male run industry.
Mm.
It's even little things like something that used to really wind me up. As somebody who has quite strong feminist values, I used to read the letters that would come through. So this was when I was doing the admin. I used to get the letters that would come through, and it would always, the broadsheet that I was working for at the time had an older audience, so that's probably a large reason why. But they would write to the editor, so you would say, it'd say, "Dear editor," and you'd open this letter up, and it would always say, "Dear sir." It would never ever
Oh,
say
really?
"sir" or "madam." It was always, or whenever I used to have someone call up, can I speak to the editor of whatever desk it was? It was always presumed that it was going to be a man. That's not necessarily sexism within newspapers, but I have seen it in a kind of the old, the kind of the dinosaurs of the newsroom, so that the kind of the old boys that have been there since the dawn of time would just kind of see you as a skirt, if that makes sense.
Right.
Especially when I got my NCTJ and I actually started working properly as a writer, you would kind of get this slight patronizing feel about it. And you'd look around the desks and it would be this was in 2015. The desks were high, they had way more men on the news desk. Something that I've noticed recently is that one of the places that I work for, so often if there's been a stabbing or if something's happened and they need to send a reporter out or whatever, it's always a guy that they send out. It's never one of the girls. And we've got a lot of really, really strong and very very talented women on our news desk that I work for, and it's just a shame. But I think it's just very ingrained.
Yeah, and even the fact that you just saying to me we've got really strong women, like it almost feels like sometimes you have to justify it more that being a woman, like I am a strong woman, or we've got strong women, whereas it's almost sometimes taken for a given that he's a man, so he'll be strong enough to sort of take that on, type thing.
Yeah, I think media as a whole is doing well on being more diverse. But I thought about this the other day. Obviously I work in radio as well. I don't think there is a single breakfast show in, like, I'm talking national radio. There might be some at local level. But if you think of all of the national breakfast shows that are on this country, they're all a male reader, and they might maybe have a kind of female co-presenter, but it's always a guy, always a guy. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. There are so many talented women, female broadcasters out there that just don't quite get that same the same sort of stab at it. But it's definitely something that is getting better, definitely.
Yeah.
But I've had, when I used to, this is a very good example of sexism in the workplace. I used to bake cakes, and I'd kind of do it on a weekly basis. And I actually kind of did it in a way to be able to speak to people, because this was when I was quite new again. So I really wanted to get to know everyone and really soak up as much knowledge as I could. So I would bake and I'd bring the cakes in. And it would, and it works. So if you're listening to this and you want to get into journalism, just bake loads of cakes. They love it.
Number one tip.
Just suck up to everyone. But I got a G chat message from one of the men that I'd given, I'd walked around and kind of gave a cake, and he kind of made a comment about my buns. And I just thought, you wouldn't say that if I was a bloke.
No.
You know, and it was a very, very, very suggestive in what he said.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not good, but it is changing, and that's important.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of slightly not against all, but it's a good sort of sign from the past. I was just thinking about like famous newsreaders the other day, and I thought actually Trevor McDonald and what was her name, Moira, they were like really they were two people of color, and she was a woman, and they were both two of the biggest newsreaders at the time. I think Moira Stewart, maybe her name was.
I think it is Moira Stewart, yeah, but I know exactly who you're talking about. She's like the face of BBC News. She's been there forever.
Yeah, so it's interesting it's good. It's always nice to look back sometimes, you know, a decade ago, a couple of decades ago, and think, oh, you know, that we had some of these people who were breaking the mold, and yeah, I guess I imagine, like, you know, if you're facing sexism, you're facing sort of racism or anything like that, then if you get to a position that high, then you've maybe worked twice as hard as some of the other people, and it's been more of a struggle. So it's even more impressive when they get to those sort of positions.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we kind of joke about is that you know, and I don't mean this to be offensive, but you know, in the newsroom, it's journalism. It's for white middle class males. It is, and that's kind of how it was back in the day as well. You know, even with the likes of people like Trevor McDonald and stuff, it was still very much it was a white boys club. And yeah, you're completely right. I think I'm so inspired by female journalists, especially going back kind of, you know, 40 odd years. It would have been a lot harder back then, but just the female journalists who have managed to kind of, like you said, just really stick it out and be in these environments where actually, you know, there will be things like what was said to me, and you just kind of have to just rise above it and don't ignore it. Absolutely, don't ignore it. But it definitely says something.
Yeah. Are there any female journalists you really rate, or past and present?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Bryony Gordon, who
I haven't heard of her.
So she works for the Telegraph.
Oh, okay.
And she does a lot of writing about her own experiences. And sometimes part of me, if I'm being completely honest, and I can, because my name isn't being revealed right now, but sometimes I do think to myself, you know, she often writes a lot about her struggles with mental health. She's had a lot of addiction problems in the past, and I think sometimes I think she's been doing it for quite a long time now, and I think sometimes I think to myself, okay, I think now it's the time to stop talking about yourself. But having said that, I had the fortune to work with her, and she is brilliant, and she has really she's really paved the way in writing and talking about mental health and addiction. And all of those things. So yeah, she was a real, you know, I've read most of her books, and you know, and we worked together and stuff as well. So it was, yeah, she was really cool. And Emma Barnett as well. So she is also Telegraph, and she now has her own show on BBC, on BBC Radio.
Oh,
and
cool.
She again she used to work for the she was the editor. Yes, she was the editor of what was called Wonder Woman, which was a section for the Telegraph, and she was just fantastic and had such amazing ideas, and she was again such a strong woman. You know, she would write about periods, she would write about sex, she'd write about all of these things that the Telegraph might never have written about before. They might be a little bit too prudish to, perhaps, but she really kind of got in on all those topics, and I have a lot of respect for people like that.
Yeah, one of my favourites is Emily Maitlis from the BBC. Yeah. She's just good, solid. Like whenever she's doing documentaries or she's doing just like an interview, or I just think she's just a brilliant. She's the epitome of sort of just really good BBC journalism. But yeah. And what were some of the key sort of lessons and sort of learning curves that you sort of learned on your journey? Do you remember any specific moments where because obviously you hadn't gone into journalism, like it wasn't something you wanted to do all your life, it was something you sort of almost fell into. What were some of the things that sort of turned around and changed your viewpoints type thing?
I think one of my most important lessons that I learned was stay the hell away from Twitter.
Okay.
I ended up getting into, so this again, I'm 27 now, and I would just have absolutely no interest in doing this at all. But when I was sort of 21 and full of passion and I had a lot to say. I ended up getting into a bit of a Twitter row with, I'm not going to mention who it was, but with another journalist. And the journalist I decided to have a bit of a row with is quite a well-known television journalist.
It's not Emily Maitlis, is it?
No, no, absolutely not. There's no way I'd ever win an argument against her. Yeah, so it was. What happened essentially was it kind of snowballed a little bit, and I ended up getting absolutely annihilated by her fan base.
Oh,
and
right.
It just made me think, oh my goodness, this realm is just so toxic. And I get, I've written for a couple of national tabloids. Some people have pretty strong opinions about the national tabloids. I have been completely torn apart on Twitter by just your average person, and I think one of the things that I learned and that was a really strong point for me was just don't run your mouth off on Twitter unless you want to create a bit of a spark and you want to have a bit of a tussle, fine.
Unless
if
you're
you
Piers
just
Morgan and wants to
well, exactly. For some people it works really well and that's great, but I think for me I learned that I didn't want that. I didn't want to have, I was waking up at 3 a.m. after this silly Twitter fight that I'd had, so these to death threats.
Jeez,
and people saying, I'm gonna rape you and put you in the boot of my car.
Oh my God.
Just, yeah. And honestly, I'll tell you this now, a journalist at some point will potentially top themselves.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
By just by the amount of abuse that we get online, especially tabloid journalists, we get so much abuse, and we laugh it off. We do, and we kind of,
I guess you have to.
Yeah, you do, and it does. People do often forget that we are humans, and we are being told what to do by an editor, essentially.
Right.
So I'd say really be careful of social media is probably my main. My main thing. Yeah, definitely.
Well, even not as a journalist, it's such a weird place, Twitter. Like because I've started to become more interested in journalism recently. A couple of people have told me like, oh, we'll get on Twitter, and that's where journalism is happening, and it's very immediate, and I was really excited, as I hadn't been on Twitter, I'd never had a Twitter account properly, and I was like, oh sweet, and I was really enjoying it at the start. I was just following all these different, well, mainly journalists, but just people who I thought were really interesting. I was trying to keep like people or more liberal, more conservative, just try and keep it fairly balanced, so I could see some sort of like, balanced debate on the sort of my news feed. But after about a month, I just started, and I guess it was quite good because I'm older now, having Twitter, I'm maybe a bit more aware than if I was, did it in my late teens or something. I wasn't as aware of what it was doing to me. But when the sort of George Floyd thing happened, and and then there was the sort of the Black Lives Matter sort of protest, and the sort of this debate was sort of ramping up. I was very, very engaged with it all, and I've been watching BBC and things for a while, but I realised I was getting really quite affected, and and after some time I started to realise the Twitter, the world, it's so weird, like how how vicious people get and how opinionated people are. And also, what I found really interesting was some of the more respected journalists were completely different on Twitter. So
Yeah.
I love Andrew Neil on the BBC. I think
Yeah.
he is brilliant. He's one of my favourite people to watch, especially with politics. If it's someone on the left or the right, he will drill them, and he will drill them with amazing facts. He's done his research. He knows his stuff. He's been in the game for a long time. I love watching him. On Twitter, I found him one of the worst people.
Really?
So
That's so
interesting.
interesting.
On
Yeah.
Twitter, he was like a Donald Trump baby. All of his stuff was just replying to people, just whining about what they were saying about him. That was pretty much it. Like he would do the occasional thing where he'd, release a news story or whatever. But there was just so much of him just trying to defend himself from these comments.
But this is the problem, and this is kind of what I was saying. I did the same thing, and a lot of journalists that are kind of new to it do that. They kind of will reply to these horrible messages, telling you to kill yourself, or they will try and be like, no, I didn't mean that, I meant this, and it just gets worse. It just gets so much worse, and it's just, you're completely right about how he becomes like with Andrew Neil becoming somebody different on Twitter. I also just think that Twitter is there's just no rules. It's a complete free for all. Obviously there are boundaries and there are things that will be removed and things like that. But in general, people just get carried away. And I've always said this, a lot of people say, oh, this new generation, they're so liberal and they've got all of these opinions on everything and everything, you can't say this and you can't say that and everything else. I think that the amount of people with opinions has not changed. People for generations have had strong, loud opinions, but they've now got a mouthpiece. I'm very lucky. If I want to voice an opinion, I can write an article about it. Whereas a lot of people can't do that, so they will take to Twitter and they will just say whatever the hell they want to say because there's no immediate repercussion, as if because there's no one standing in front of them. And I just think you're completely right that Twitter is brilliant for journalism. It is, because it's immediate. You see things straight away, but it is also an absolute cesspit. And I just for mental health reasons, I just don't even look at it.
It's almost like, well, with any social media, it's so new to us, and our sort of slowly evolving brain hasn't got around social media yet. We still haven't got around it. Even the smartest people, we don't know how to healthily use social media. We don't
know.
And it's almost like whenever you sign up to social media, you need to do like a training course almost. Like to say like, this is the sort of things you need to look out for. If you're on it for too long, scrolling, you're probably lonely. Just all these sort of things. You know what I mean? It's like, if people don't, this is what TV used to be. For us when we were kids, it was like, don't sit in front of the TV for 5 hours straight. Don't. And it was these sort of things. But social media is so much more complex. It's this screen time thing plus all this other stuff. Like, when you get with kids and bullying, all these things are like going on.
Oh God, yeah. So cyberbullying is horrific because it's like I said, that the personal element is taken away. But when you said about how Twitter is really good because it's instant. You see things that happen straight away. News often happens first on Twitter, and it does. That's true. However, the problem with Twitter is it doesn't have. So if we've got a story, for example, and we're gonna put it on our online newspaper page, we if it's a risky one, we have to run it through lawyers. We have a whole team of lawyers. We often run things through Ipso. And we'll check guidelines and everything else. The problem with Twitter is there is none of that.
No.
So stuff just gets put out there for millions of people to look at that hasn't been checked by lawyers, that hasn't had that kind of, hasn't been gone through with a fine-tooth comb in the same way that journalism often is. And that's why Twitter is so quick. The amount of times I've been in a newsroom, we've been told breaking news, but we've got to sit on it for a couple of hours because we've got to wait for the lawyers to double check everything's fine. Twitter, bash, straight away, it's out there.
Do you like that? I guess this is going to go into more sort of like how much restrictions we should place on news. But do you like that you have those things in place, like to check, double check, all the legal stuff, or
Absolutely,
right? Yeah.
yeah. I think it's as I've been doing this now for about 5 years, and I do still get people joking me, "Oh, bloody journalists, can't trust you lot, you're all just writing a load of rubbish," and all that kind of stuff. And you hear that all the time, and you learn just to laugh along with it. But I do often have to say to people, you do realise how much we have to check things. It's not just a case of writing these things about people, for example, and then upsetting someone or whatever it is. I think because journalists get targeted so much. If you go online and you see a newspaper article, for example, and say completely, this is just completely off the top of my head, it is attacking, oh goodness, Lady Gaga, for example. So it's a piece that is maybe it's talking about how she's put on weight, right? Okay, so something like that. It's a horrible article. It's not particularly very nice. It's got someone's name on it. The person who is reading that article will see that person's name and go, right, all of this is all down to them, and it's all of their fault. What people don't realise is the journalists are actually usually kind of the last people involved. All of these stories are decided by the editors and the higher powers, and then they will then get given and passed. I mean, this is mainly in tabloid journalism, but they will then get passed down to the journalists to then write and create the piece and to do all of the pictures and stuff. But when people look at these stories and they go, "Oh, I can't believe they've written that about Caroline Flack," or all of these things, it's not actually the journalist is just being told what to do by the editor and is then just doing it. It's just as simple as that. Unless you're doing an opinion piece or a feature, if you're a news writer, we just deal with the facts, and we are following rules from the editors.
Okay, so I guess that's a good message to send out. If you do want to write in, or you do want to attack the editor or the newspaper as a whole, don't go for these. Okay, well, I guess this will be a good way to maybe flip the coin a little bit and say there is good reason for people to write in sometimes, and there's good reason that journalism or newspapers get criticised.
Yes.
What do you think those reasons are? Where do you think, I mean, you said the sort of Lady Gaga thing. I think those sort of stories are disgusting. I think they're just, they're the scourge of just like the most basic, worst parts of people's sort of like psyche of just like, pointing at her and look at her, she looks disgusting. What parts of journalism do you think really bother you and you think need to be addressed, and how do we address that? I mean, you can ever think about it, or
it's a massive question. No, I mean, it's I think okay, so I will give an example. So one of the tabloids that I work for, I have had I think the issue that I have is its viewpoint towards women and women's bodies in particular. And I think that, so for example, if you are to look on the Sun, maybe not so much the Mirror, the Sun, the Star, the Express, and
magazine. I know it's a magazine, but
yeah, exactly. And the Daily Mail. If they're writing a weather story, right, and we do a lot of those because they get us a lot of views. So our SEO teams that work very hard to make sure we all have a job get us to write a lot of weather stories.
What just like it's been a sweltering, like the sort of typical like people on the beach type thing.
Because people do search that. You go into Google, one of the most searched things in Google is what's the weather going to be like today. So the news organisations jump on that. But what drives me absolutely bonkers is that one of the first pictures will be, if it's about heatwave, for example, which it has been, it will be a sexy woman in a bikini. It will be and it's that really, really gets on my nerves. And there's been we've written stories, and this is not an unusual thing. This is actually a very normal thing. if we are writing a story, so say for example, a girl has died, and it's a really sad story. She's died in a car crash, for example. If they're in conference, all of the editors get together and they have a chat about what stories we want to do and everything else. If you've got a girl who's died in a car crash, if she's really good looking, that story will make the newspaper. If she is what the person deems to be unattractive, it probably won't, unless it was some horrific 20 car pile up mental, big something really out of the norm. It's very normal. I've written stories before. I wrote a story about a woman who saved someone was drowning in the sea in England, and she dived in and saved them, and I wrote this story about what happened. And I remember I got a message from one of the editors saying, yeah, okay, can we just change that top picture for one where she looks a bit more sexy? And I just thought, my God, like, this is just, we're going back so many years. Like, let's stop sexualizing women. But at the same time, they're doing it because the readers, and for this particular tabloid, it's a very male heavy readership. They want to see women in bikinis and things like that. So that sort of thing pees me off.
What is page 3? Because it's not boobs anymore, is it? But it's still
it's skimpy bikinis. It's still very much sexy. I mean, but in my opinion, those women have chosen to do that as a career. So I have no issue. I personally don't have an issue with page 3 models, because I think, no, that's your choice. You've got a fantastic body and you want to flaunt it. That's fine. What I don't agree with is the attitude in the newsroom towards, we often will do so many stories where you'll hear someone saying, is she good looking? And it's almost like, if she's not, then we potentially wouldn't do the story, or it wouldn't be as big on the page.
Yeah, it's like, it's one of the downsides of freedom, isn't it? Is that you get all the horrible sides of, people expressing their innermost desires and innermost sort of like demons or whatever. How do we get around that? Like, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it must be a fact that well, I don't know if it's a fact. That's a silly thing to say, but it must be true that to a certain extent, having attractive people sells more newspapers.
It does. No, that is a fact. You can definitely say that's a fact, because it is. So, but what I will say, so when you say how do we change that and how do we move away from it, it is having more women as editors. It's as simple as that.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm not meaning to sound anti men at all, but it is, in the times that I have been asked to change a picture in a story to make it a better picture of the woman, or I wasn't part of this story, but there was a big plane crash. Where was this? I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but I know the person who was responsible for it. But massive plane crash, loads of footballers on it, and I think they were potentially Brazilian footballers, but they all died. It was really, really sad. They had their partners on board as well. They ran the story in the paper, and all of the women were in bikinis in the pictures. And this is a story about people that have died. It's
what?
And and it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And part of me is quite sad, because I've become quite desensitized to this.
Yeah. You've had to sort
of
yeah.
But I think it is a case of, the more women that are in higher positions of power within news, the less that will happen. However, I work as a reporter. I have no ambition in being an editor. It's not the way that I want my career to move. However, I have found myself in a position where I was writing a story about a woman who had suffered horrific domestic abuse, and she was relatively well known. And one of the editors had asked me if I can put in these pictures of her again in a bikini, and I actually flagged it, and I said, I don't think it's relevant for us to put these pictures in the story. And then an editor above that editor that asked me was like, "You were completely right to flag that." And I think that's the thing. I think a lot of journalists, young journalists especially, are so scared of editors to question. But actually, a lot of this, I mean, this is something that I was taught when I was doing my course. Is that you should always question something if you don't. If you're not happy with it and if you don't feel comfortable, don't put your name on something. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you should be able to flag it. You don't go in there aggressive, but you just say, I don't feel comfortable doing this because of X, Y, and Z. And I would say 9 out of 10 times I've done that, they've gone, no, that's fair. That's a completely right
that's
comment.
Great. That's
Great. Yeah.
That's
exactly.
how change happens, is those little wins.
Exactly.
And that's I'm really glad to hear that's part of the course as well, because I guess when you go into a job like that, you don't have proper big training, the same sort of like intense training in terms of like HR and that sort of thing, and what you say and what you don't say. And so that's really good that you learn sort of to speak up and do it in a constructive way. I think that's something that pretty much everyone can agree on, apart from the people that are so protective of their positions that they don't want anyone to get in. I think we can all agree that diversity on the whole is a good thing. Now, like,
of course it is.
We can all debate on how we get there. Some people say that some feminists are too strong and they just want to replace men, and then there's people on the other side who think that women can't get any foot at all foot at all. But we can all agree that surely that having a diverse workplace and whatever it is going to benefit everyone.
Well, look, I mean, one of the issues with the Black Lives Matters situations is that there isn't enough black representation on television, in different. If you look at films, they will often say there's a token black person. There isn't a more balance in that. And I think like you said, the more that workplaces become they have that diversity, the more that change will happen. Because at the moment, and for years and years and years, the music industry, the TV industry, the newspaper industry, the media, which has an insane amount of power, is run by white middle-aged men. So as soon as that starts to change, and even, I'm one of the places I'm working at the moment, one of the absolute top dogs is a woman, and that that's quite a big thing now. And there are so many more women being in really huge positions of power, and that means that there will be, and it's exactly the same with race. The more CEOs that we have of big newspapers or big companies or TV companies, the more of those that are black, it means that because they are black, there'll be more representation of other black people. It's in the same way that the reason that the media is so white is because the top dogs are white. Whereas if they start to be mixed with women and people of different ethnicity and everything else, it will then filter through and it will start to become more of a balanced and probably more loving kind of atmosphere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it completely makes sense. For something like these tabloids, for me, I see. That's a really good one. That's a big problem. For me, another problem with them is I feel like they're so tied to politics.
Oh yeah.
With something like some of these tabloids, I don't know whether, because what we're talking about is sort of like reform, isn't it? It's this sort of big idea of like, do we just try and slowly change it over time, or do we just tear it down? Like, for me personally, I'd very happily see some of these tabloids wiped off the face of the earth. Because I feel like they just emulate so many of these problems. Like all organizations and all news outlets have issues. But these tabloids seem to encompass just, the sort of the sexism, the anti-immigration, the very some of the, obviously a more left-wing tabloid is like the Mirror, and then you've got like the Sun and the Daily Mail. But should we be trying to? Should there be more rules in place, or how do you feel about the sort of freedom of the press? How far should that go? What should we be allowed to say? How?
So I one thing I've found is, so I very much agree with you in the sense that, you know, when you say that some of these tabloids should be wiped off the face of the earth, I know which ones you're talking about, just because that's such a common ground. And whilst I can totally see why somebody who doesn't work in news would have that opinion, I honestly would. However, being part of these organisations, there are a lot of things that I actually think, you know what, this is progress. We're moving nicely in this. You know,
right.
we, for example, one of the tabloids, their features desk is fantastic. They do loads of campaigns. They do a lot of help. A lot of work with mental health. They, there was this huge campaign that they did about a certain social media outlet that was in a bit of trouble, and it kind of got a bit of bad press. And that whole team worked really hard on, doing investigative journalism, which is, a lot of people forget that actually we need media, because we need the police to be put under scrutiny. We need the government to be put under scrutiny. While I think it's very easy to go, oh, you get these tabloids and it's all just full of celebrity crap and, racism and X, Y, and Z, there are also huge investigations that are done by newspapers that absolutely, that wouldn't come to surface if it wasn't for those journalists that work really, really hard to do that. So, but I do agree there are things that need to be changed. When it comes to politics, yeah, I mean, this is a difficult one. I very much need to watch the Rupert Murdoch documentary that's on at the moment, because I'm aware that a lot has come out about, just how much of a sway Rupert Murdoch has on the political parties.
Oh yeah, he's a mafia boss.
Oh, I mean, it's crazy.
Definitely watch it. It is one of the most fascinating documentaries I've seen in a long time. It's amazing.
I'll watch it, and I'll have to let you know my thoughts on it. Yeah. But newspapers have supported politicians and political parties for centuries. It's not new. This has been going on for a very long time. You used to have the it would be very normal for the editor of the I don't know, the Sun, for example, to go and sit down with one of the, with Churchill or whatever, and that wouldn't be unusual. What I don't particularly like is, so one of the tabloids I work for is very pro-Boris and very pro-Conservatives. I personally sway a lot more to the left. I'm fairly well balanced, but I think I'm more that way inclined. So it's quite difficult sometimes to write some of these stories, which, are very kind of pro-conservative stories, for example. And, I've been told before I've pitched stories, and I've been then told by my editor that no, it's a little bit too anti-Boris. And it's kind of like, that's where the freedom is lost, because we are appeasing these political parties. And we for example, so Donald Trump was coming over. I can't even remember when this was. These years are all blending into one, but he was coming over for a UK visit. I want to say maybe 2 years ago. And the newspaper that I was working for at the time was very, very keen on getting an interview with him. So the news running up to his visit was all very, we weren't necessarily pro Donald Trump, but it didn't say anything that was going to cast him in a really, really awful light, which, let's be honest, isn't difficult. So yeah, that sort of thing is when things like that happen, that's when you start to feel like a bit of a puppet, and you feel like you're in a cog.
So how do you square that? How do you, just for yourself personally, if you, let's say you're more liberal, which I guess you're saying you are, and you're working in an establishment which is very much conservative, how do you sort of square that, and how do you just sort of accept I've just got to do this because it's part of the job? Or I mean, do you hope that one day...
It's so hard. It's really... You know what? My absolute honest opinion, my honest answer to that is that I just see it as this is just my job and this is just part of it. And that, me saying that, makes me really, really sad because you get fantastic journalists out there, way better journalists than me, that they'd never do that. They would never go against what they believe in. You know, don't get me wrong, I would absolutely downright refuse to write anything that was, you know, against. I would never write anything that was going to be sexist or that was going to be racist or anything like that. Like, you know, I'm very, very hot on not doing anything like that. However, when it comes to politics, it's a lot more, you kind of just keep quiet and you get on with it. For me personally, it's really difficult because a lot of journalists, especially young ones who are just trying to get as much experience as they can, you know, they are desperate to work at these newspapers. Let's say The Sun, for example. You know, there are so many journalists that I know that have gone and worked there, and they have worked so hard, but they still get battered by people being like, "Oh, well, you're a Sun journalist." And I think a lot of people don't realise that actually it's really, really bloody hard to get into national news, and sometimes to climb up and eventually, you know, say for example, you've got aspirations of being, I don't know, a foreign correspondent for the Times. It's likely that you're probably going to have to do a stint at one of the tabloids. You know, it's almost ludicrous. If I had somebody in front of me now that wants to be a journalist and they sat there and went, "I'm only going to work for the Times," I'd say, "All right, well, good luck then." Because you just can't. You unfortunately you have to just switch that off. And you have, whether or not you agree with the paper or not, you are a reporter for that paper, so you have to just get on with it. And if you can't stick with that, then you have to move elsewhere. And for me, you know, my interest lies probably more heavily in radio, so that almost sounds silly, but that almost makes me feel a little bit more sane. I think if I was only writing for one particular tabloid, I'd probably find that quite hard. But in a way, I kind of just see it as I'm a freelancer and I work for several organizations, and when I'm working for X organization, I make sure I wear my X hat, and when I'm working for Y organization, I put on my Y hat, and I kind of, that's just what you have to do.
Yeah, it's a difficult trade-off, isn't it? And it's a difficult. I think you're right. It's like, and I think one thing as well is journalists always get a bad rap, and you know, this sort of question. I get that, you know, you probably have felt this a lot, and that you've probably had to go through your mind of like, oh, you know, this is right, but every organization has that to a certain extent, where you have to make some sort of trade-off. Sometimes it's moral, so I guess people who want to work in energy, for example, but want to work in sustainable energy long term, they might have to work for a while in oil, or if you want to be an engineer, you want to build cars, but you want it to be electric cars, you might have to work for a while, you know, so on many different levels, there's different trade-offs, and sometimes those trade-offs are working for very little money, or you're doing extremely disgusting work, or you're doing very and I guess that's just one of the things of journalism is at the moment as it stands, you sort of have to let your, not have to, but, you know, to a certain extent, if you're too strict with your moral integrity and stuff within the job, it's either gonna be a lot of a slower climb, or you're just not gonna get very far at all.
Yeah, and I mean, and it works for some people. You know, I respect people big time that say I will never work for X, Y, and Z, and I will only do this and I will only do that. And often those journalists will go on to be the authors, and they'll go on to be people that go on talk shows and everything else. And I think I completely tip my hat to them. I really, really do. However, personally, for me, my ambition doesn't really lie there. So I'm very happy to just kind of be a humble reporter and just, you know, go to work and do my job. You know, I'm not trying to impress anyone, or you know, be the next Emily Maitlis, for example. I don't have, that's not where my ambition lies. that's something I've definitely realised over the last couple of years, and in lockdown especially.
Well, that's good, and it's good to realise what works for you and what you want. You know, not you don't want a load of people doing the same thing and going for the same goal. And
No, exactly.
yeah, how do you sort of feel about? Again, sorry, it goes back to sort of the political thing again. I think that's just it for me. That's something that
That bothers you.
Yeah, well, it interests me and it bothers me in equal measure. I think Murdoch is a perfect example because he is. Even before this documentary, I knew just the power he could wield, and for the past like 20 or 30 years, a long time, every election has gone his way. And when I found that out, I was like, wow, that in itself shows the power of the media. And I'm just wondering, because when you get something like how would you feel about something like Ofcom? So Ofcom sort of regulate the BBC and TV sort of news outlets. And I don't know the exact wording, but if you want to be a certain type of news outlet on TV, you have to do certain regulations. You have to be impartial and these sort of things. I thought it was just the BBC, but Channel 4 as well, and you have to be fairly balanced. And do you? I mean, this is how I feel, but because some papers like the Sun is still the most read newspaper, the Mail is still, I think, the second most. Do you think it would be a good thing if newspapers were regulated the same way that TV is? Because you would never get the sort of news story on the BBC that you do in the Daily Mail, or even the Mirror, just to be balanced, or even, to a certain extent. Well, I guess the Guardian's pretty good, but it's still pretty left wing leaning.
Oh yeah, majorly left wing.
Yeah. So yeah, do you feel like newspapers should? There's just so much stuff with all the sort of Meghan Markle and that, or them sort of like railing back against newspapers. And then a few years ago, there was sort of the Leveson inquiry, which was all the phone tapping. So News of the World, which was owned by Murdoch, he's tapped all these phones, and celebrities getting stalked, and people just. What do you think there should be more regulation to rein this sort of bad behaviour in, or do you quite like or think it's a good thing that the TV is the TV, and if you want to get that sort of information and that sort of balanced stuff, then you can go to TV, and the newspapers are its own thing? Like, how do you sort of feel about that?
Right. So I mean, that's a huge question as well.
Yeah.
I think. I think that you have to be really careful with heavily regulating stuff, because people can smell bullshit. I think people can tell if something's been heavily monitored. And I think sometimes I love reading a story that has got really strong opinions and it's really gunning for it. And it's really just, I think we're at risk of becoming too heavily sensitive and maybe sort of being a little bit over the top with restrictions on what we can and can't do. Having said that, on the other hand, I do think that there probably needs to be a little bit more of a rein in. Things like the Leveson inquiry. That is catastrophic and should never have happened. Like, there's no excuse for that whatsoever. But I don't think that. It wouldn't. I don't think that newspapers should ever just be completely. Every single newspaper would be neutral, because if every single newspaper would be neutral, it wouldn't work. So, for example, you've got Guardian readers, right? So Guardian readers typically, and the thing is, when you're at a newspaper, you write with that person in mind. So when I've been at these, when I've been at these different places, I'm thinking, right, who is my audience? Who am I writing for? A lot of the time, the Sun will come into a lot of stick for all of these stories. However, those stories are being published because they are being read. So they're not just being put out there just to see what happens. The reason that the Sun Online is so popular is because people want to read that stuff, and people do read that stuff. And we monitor how many views each story gets, and if we know something in particular does very well, we will do more of that.
Sure,
and if we
but
know
then devil's advocate would say people want to see women in bikinis.
Yeah, well, you're yeah, spot on. You're completely right. But also, I mean, there's a difference between knowing that people really enjoy property porn, for example. Like when we do these stories with these like massive mansions and everything else, they do so well, and we know that people enjoy reading them. That's fine. But I think then there's a moral thing, like, you know, putting pictures of people in bikinis, celebrities in bikinis. I have less of an opinion on because they're celebrities.
Yeah.
However, a car crash victim in a bikini is obviously completely different. So I think there is no hard and fast rule. And going back to my point about if all newspapers were just sort of straight down the line, there'd only be one newspaper in the country. There wouldn't be. You know, people, a Guardian reader wouldn't want to read the Sun, and the Sun reader wouldn't want to read the Guardian.
You say that, but there's lots of news channels.
Yes, that's true. However,
you've got Sky News and Channel 4 and BBC and Channel 5 and stuff like that.
But Sky News is very different to BBC News.
Yeah,
the layout is very different.
It is different, but they have a lot more strict rules than the Daily Mail.
Yes, and you're completely right. And I would, you know, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to defend. I'm not going to defend the British newspaper media because, you know, there are definite holes within it that I cannot sit here and go, yeah, Leveson inquiry was fine. That was just journalism. It's not. But again, that journalists shouldn't necessarily be held accountable for that. It is the big dogs.
No, yeah, definitely.
That call the shots. I think in answer to your question, I think more regulation. I think it would be good for more regulation to be in place, but I don't think that tabloids and broadsheets should go down the sort of BBC impartial, straight down the middle rule. I just don't think that would. Newspapers would die. It wouldn't work.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? It's really difficult. It's I think the main problem I have is power, like that's too concentrated and used in the wrong way. When I learned that the tabloids can swing an election, and not just even by a bit, but like quite massively. Yeah. Even if it was just purely, you know, liberal. So I'm more liberal. But if the Mirror was swinging, you know, was huge, and a lot of the newspapers on the left, and they were swinging it, I would have a problem with that as well. So I'm concerned about power, and I'm concerned about when it's used, and I don't really, you know, have the answers, and I'm not blaming the journalists. I'm not blaming anyone. It just seems like we're in a bit of a weird situation, and like, some other countries seem to not have as toxic a press as we do, and I would just like to see if there's ways to sort of pull back on that toxicity. And
I don't know. I think I disagree with you there, because if you look at China, for example.
Oh yeah.
They are so regimented in what they can and can't say. They are told what to write. You know, I think actually we're pretty lucky.
Oh yeah.
That we do have you know, free press, so to speak. I think that, you know, I've met with a lot of journalists that are based in the US and based in Australia. British journalists and British journalism is hailed big time over there. We you know, as many faults as the British media has, it is also, you know, that. So I've got Australian friends that actually, so they work in Sydney, and they come over to London, and they work for our tabloids and our broadsheets and news companies and whoever, and they do it for a couple of years. And they go back to Sydney, and people in Sydney call that the London effect.
Right.
And it is literally because they think, and you know, they hold the way we do media in such high regard, if a journalist has come over here, learnt how we do it, and goes back over there, they'll be paid so much more. They'll get an instant pay rise. They'll do so well. So while yes, there is really horrible sides to it, we also do media very, very well. To a certain degree. This is the thing. I just don't think there's a hard and fast answer for it. I think it's about compromise. It's about making informed decisions, and just to say, right, let's just stop all tabloid journalism. It's never going to happen. But it's about little changes that happen within, like I said, people like myself or other people kind of going, you know what, I don't think we need a bikini picture on this story. It's little things like that that will change. Nothing happens overnight. Nothing happens overnight. The Leveson inquiry, that will never happen again. It will never, ever happen again. But journalists used to be a lot more sneaky. Rebecca Brooks got her job. She pretended to be... I wish I knew the exact story. This has just popped into my head. But she pretended to be a cleaner, and she went and snooped in the Times' office, pretended to be a cleaner, and got their front page for the next day. Wow. And went and told another newspaper about it. People were so sneaky. Whereas as a journalist, I'm quote marks new journalist now, I know I'd be in so much trouble if I did that.
Yeah.
So there are changes in that respect.
You know what? Yeah, you're absolutely right. I completely agree. And actually, as I was saying it, I did think if these newspapers, because I'm more liberal, if these newspapers were actually more liberal leaning, the Daily Mail was more liberal and the Sun more liberal. I don't think it's very genuine of me to say that I would be just as up in arms about it. I don't think I would. I think part of it as well is because it's not my political affiliation is part of it, if I'm being completely honest with myself.
The one thing I would say that would be very good food for thought there is, because you probably fall into the please quote me if I'm wrong, you probably fall into the Guardian, maybe the Independent, that kind of bracket.
I actually don't. I respect the time. So BBC is my baby. That's the one. That's I love BBC. Al Jazeera, even though that's slightly more left leaning. I tend to go for TV stuff. But I actually would not. I wouldn't. I would rate the Guardian as some really amazing journalism, but also the Times is some really amazing journalism, and also all newspapers. So actually, I a few years ago I probably would have said the Guardian, but I have some conservative views as well, and I like to get my more factual information, and maybe that's part of my sort of like, I've got my back up about these tabloids, is it's not for me, I should maybe chill out a little bit, because people like to read like just fun fluff. And
well, I mean, what I was going to say is that there is a reason why the Sun and the Daily Mail are the biggest read newspapers in the UK. There is a reason for that, and it's I think it's a 50-50 split. I think that the newspapers in general, the editing teams and the journalists and everybody else play a part in swaying, like you said, throwing elections and all that kind of thing. But equally, people aren't stupid. If you go into a newsagent, if you want to read the stuff that's in the Daily Mail, you're going to pick it up and you're going to buy it.
Yeah.
Or equally, if you're going to open your webpage and you're going to, the reason that these newspapers are so successful is because they, like I said to you earlier, they are printing and writing stuff that people want to read. And it just shows that is the more popular opinion in the country, whether we like it or not. It's just, otherwise the Guardian would be the top read,
I completely agree. I do think that's a really good point. I think another aspect is the easiness as well. Like, you pick up the Guardian and it is intimidating. You pick up, the Financial Times, and it's intimidating. I asked my mum what she used to read the Daily Mail. It was always on our thing when we were younger, and she always used to vote like Lib Dem. So she's never been that political. So I think part of it as well is that to be honest, I'm probably annoyed because they've just done it so bloody well, and people like Murdoch are the epitome of they're genius. They're absolute genius because so I think a part of it is that they're easy to read. And I asked my mum, like, oh, so why did you read the Daily Mail? And she said it was easy. And that was it.
And people do like light-hearted stories. There's enough doom and gloom in the world. You open up the Sun newspaper, and you'll find a silly story about a dog, or you'll find it. That's I think the entertainment value is what a lot of people like. I would say my online newspaper of choice, because I don't really buy papers, is probably the Daily Mail. And I'm not a heavily conservative person, like I said, but I quite like scrolling through and seeing these, tatty stories. People do like a little bit of fluff.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think I might buy a few tabloids actually, because I haven't actually read one for a long time, and I think I might just, because I think there's too much of me of sort of like from the outside type thing. I'm sort of looking at it, but I think I might just get a few to actually know what I'm talking about a bit more. And see what's going on.
I think what I will say though is I am very much with you on the sense that I do think that I do think newspapers have too much of a political sway, but I do think that people also have their own brains, and yes, I think that they do have a strong sway on things, but equally people are also not silly, and they can go and read up on whatever political party they want to. It's very easy to blame. It's very easy to go, oh, the bloody newspapers, but actually, come on, we're all clever people here,
Yeah. And just to be absolutely clear, like I said at the very beginning, I really respect journalism. I think you do amazing. I think the backlash you get, like I had a particular family member who during this whole coronavirus stuff, like it was like, oh, bloody journalists, and I just think that whole phrase is ridiculous. Really, it's like, yes, there's a few bad apples and there's a few things, but on the whole, journalism is an amazing thing, like holding power to account and revealing these.
So important.
It's so.
And I tell you what, anyone that has slagged journalists off during the coronavirus, I'm saying this to you now, you have no idea how hard it has been. It has been exhausting, and I have covered coronavirus right from the start. I've been on it. Most of the stories, I mean, a little bit less now, but in March, for example, pretty much I was writing 8 stories a day.
Wow.
7 of those would be coronavirus based. And we all had like a very big staff meeting, and we were told we have to make sure that we are so accurate on this. This is so important that we get this completely right. And I think when they were kind of saying, oh, it's fake news or bloody, it's a constant coronavirus, or, and all this kind of thing. It's like, well, it's constant coronavirus, A, because this is a pandemic and it's the biggest thing that's happened for generations.
Yeah.
B, it's really, really serious. This isn't just a little thing. This is affecting everybody. But my goodness, I had a breakdown within the first, so we do a lot of live blogs. And we had one going for coronavirus, and I was put on it for the first time, and this was probably in March. So I as a person was pretty scared, as was the rest of the country, with what the hell was going on. And I was writing solidly for 8 hours purely about coronavirus.
Yeah.
And at the end, I it sounds really dramatic. I was doing it from home. I laid on the floor and cried because it was just. It's one thing, journalists have to write about murder and death and rape and all of these really grisly, we see really horrible things. We see the pictures before they get fuzzed over, the ones that you guys see. We see some really nasty stuff. There is something about seeing nasty stuff that doesn't directly affect you and seeing nasty stuff that directly affects you. I was seeing dead bodies, the people that died from coronavirus, and that's a lot. And I think actually the whole of the journal, media industry and journalists in general that have been working during this time deserve a massive pat on the back.
I agree.
Like it's been intense.
And
it's been intense.
It's a thankless job.
It is. Well, we were never included in the, we technically were key workers. We had key worker passes. We were never included in the thank yous. And that's fine, because I completely take my hats off to the shop workers and the bin men and everybody that played their part in the coronavirus, when lockdown was first started. But journalists worked bloody hard, and all we really got was stick for it, and I'm that makes me quite sad.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's a really important. I want to get that message out, especially to this one family member, but to anyone who just paint journalists with this weird brush. And most of this conversation, I know I've been picking apart and playing devil's advocate, but that's good. That's more like I have a love for what you do. I have a love for journalism, and I just want to almost perfect it. I want to just make it even better than it is, type thing. And see how
absolutely.
we can do that. But yeah, and especially during this time, I can't remember the last time I saw journalism as effective at holding power to account during this time. So, the journalist, it would come out and there would be these things about masks and like we haven't got enough PPE, and they would push and push and push, and then the politicians would do something, and it's been same every step of the way with every part of it. I've seen it. I mean, I've forgotten the stages now, but I remember at the start there was like 5 major things that the journalism was pushing and news was pushing on politicians and leaning on politicians, and the politicians were okay, we need to, and it's happened throughout this coronavirus. Even the stuff with they're going to do was it free school meals? They were going to take that away or something, and that footballer came out and just
Marcus Rashford, I think it was.
Just there's been so much the amazingness of how journalism can be a voice for the people, and
absolutely.
So I want to say thank you, and I think that you've all done a great job, and you've done a great job, because we need good journalism, and I think when people say bloody journalists, I think if you're being very specific about one particular story, fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we should be much more appreciative of what you do. Yeah.
As a whole, journalists we really just want to get to the root of stuff. We care. We want to push things. Investigative journalism at its best is so needed, and it's I think you're completely right. I think that really we are just a bunch of people that we're just very nosy, and we want what's right and we want to hold people account if they need to be held account. And I think like you said, it's definitely something that gets lost a little bit, I think.
Cool. Well, I think that's a pretty good message to end on.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just say to anyone listening, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please pass it around. Like to get as many ears on this as possible. But thank you so much, Sophie. It's been brilliant.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.